On a bitterly cold night in January 1991, 3 nuns disappeared from St. Agnes Abbey, nestled on the outskirts of Ashford, Vermont. Sister Margaret Doyle, Sister Annette Green, and Sister Rachel Monroe. No note, no sign of forced entry. Just gone. The case baffled investigators and haunted the local community. For over 30 years, it became a chilling small-town legend until a quiet discovery in 2023 brought the truth back to the surface. That January night, no one in Ashford could have imagined that the peaceful rhythm of their town, population barely 3,800, was about to be shattered by a mystery buried for decades. The discovery came during a renovation of the Abbey's old library, now mostly used for storage. A construction worker, hired to restore the crumbling interior, accidentally knocked through a false wall. Behind it, a worn, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed, but the words inside were clear and terrifying. They would finally reveal the fate of the missing sisters and expose something far darker, a secret some in Ashford had kept buried for years. Before we dive into what the journal uncovered, let's rewind. Ashford sits in the hills of northern Vermont, where snow blankets the ground from November to April, and fog clings to the valleys like ghosts. The town itself is quiet, dotted with colonial homes, a single traffic light, and a courthouse that's been in use since the 1800s. St. Agnes Abbey sat about 2 miles outside town, surrounded by dense woods and frozen fields. Built in the 19th century, the stone abbey was once home to 20 Benedictine nuns. In 1991, their numbers had dwindled to just 12. The 3 who disappeared were known in town, and though different in age and personality, each was respected, if not deeply loved, by the community. Sister Margaret Doyle, age 65, was the oldest. Born in Syracuse, New York, she had joined the order at 22 and spent over 4 decades in religious service. Stern but fair, she was the Abbey's de facto disciplinarian. She led the daily choir with military precision and rarely tolerated lateness or laxity. Yet those close to her knew of her love for literature and how she wept silently during Vespers when they sang certain psalms. Sister Annette Green, 43, had arrived at St. Agnes only a few years earlier after walking away from a promising career in internal medicine. A former ER doctor from Boston, she was intelligent, analytical, and deeply introverted. She ran the Abbey's infirmary and often provided basic care for Ashford's elderly, especially during brutal Vermont winters when travel into town was near impossible. She wore wire-framed glasses and never removed a tiny St. Jude medallion from around her neck, a relic of her past life. Then, there was Sister Rachel Monroe. At 27, she was the youngest member of the Abbey. Originally from a small town in Kentucky, she'd joined the order just 3 years earlier after suffering what others only vaguely referred to as a personal tragedy. Always smiling, always moving, she had a knack for gardening, even in Vermont's stubborn soil, and had kept detailed notes in her diary about the plants, the seasons, and her spiritual reflections. Her energy made her a favorite not only among the nuns, but also among the kids who visited the Abbey's grounds each spring for the Easter festival. The routine at St. Agnes was as predictable as a clock. Days began at 4:45 a.m. with lauds, morning prayers, followed by work, prayer, study, and silence. Meals were simple: broth, bread, and sometimes garden vegetables. The women were devoted to their faith, their community, and to each other. But in the months before the sisters vanished, things started to change. A few locals reported seeing Sister Annette in the Ashford Public Library, reading through old town records, medical journals, even obituaries. Sister Margaret stopped visiting the general store on Fridays, where she'd once picked up supplies and exchanged polite gossip with the shop owner. And Sister Rachel? She was seen multiple times talking in hushed tones with Father Thomas Bell, the parish priest of Ashford. After those meetings, she often looked disturbed, eyes red, hands shaking. Then, the day before they disappeared, someone unusual visited the abbey. According to the groundskeeper, a man in his late 40s wearing a dark overcoat pulled up in a nondescript sedan around noon. He asked to speak with the Mother Superior, Sister Helen Porter. The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes. No one knew his name or why he came. That evening, during dinner, Sisters Margaret, Annette, and Rachel barely touched their food. The silence between them was more than religious. It was tense, loaded, like something had shifted. January 22nd, 1991. A Tuesday. Sub-zero wind chills. The abbey woke, as usual, before dawn. The chapel was lit with candles, their flames flickering under the weight of a hard frost. Sister Margaret's voice led the hymns, steady as ever, but the organist later confessed that her voice cracked on the final note. A small, but unusual detail. After breakfast, the women began their daily routines. Sister Margaret retreated to the archives to continue digitizing old parish records. Sister Annette went to check on 2 elderly nuns battling respiratory infections, preparing herbal remedies in the infirmary. And Sister Rachel trudged through the snow to the garden shed, determined to preserve the last of her winter kale from the coming freeze. Around 10 a.m., a delivery arrived. A certified letter for Sister Margaret. The youngest novice, Emily Jensen, remembered that moment well. Sister Margaret's hands trembled when she saw the sender's name. She turned white as snow and had to sit down to open it. Whatever it contained, she didn't tell anyone. At lunch, the 3 sisters broke with protocol and sat together at the far end of the table. They whispered, something strictly forbidden during meals. The Mother Superior noticed, but chose not to intervene. There was something urgent in their voices, she later told investigators. Something final. The last outsider to see the 3 sisters was Joe Harlan, a local farmer. He'd stopped by the kitchen entrance to drop off eggs. He later said the women were all there, huddled together near the storage door. Sister Rachel looked like she'd been crying. Sister Margaret clutched a dark, canvas-wrapped bundle. "I thought maybe they were dealing with a family emergency," he said. "Didn't think much of it at the time." That evening, the sisters failed to show up for Vespers. Assuming someone was ill, Sister Helen sent 2 novices to check their rooms. All were empty, their beds neatly made, belongings untouched. But Rachel's diary was missing. Annette's St. Jude medallion had been left on her open Bible, right on Psalm 55. "Oh, that I had wings like a dove, I would fly away and be at rest." At 8:15 p.m., the Mother Superior called Father Bell. He advised immediate contact with the Vermont State Police. By 10 p.m., troopers arrived as snow began falling. They launched a search of the abbey grounds, nearby woods, and the trails leading toward town. Nothing. Not a single footprint in the fresh snow. No broken branches. No tracks. It was as though the 3 nuns had been erased from the earth. 2 days later, Trooper Dan Ramirez, while sweeping through the abbey's library, noticed something strange. An old theological book, Interior Castles by St. Teresa of Avila, was placed backwards on a shelf. Inside, a red thread marked a chapter about spiritual trials, and scribbled faintly in the margins, "The truth hides in the foundation, not in the spires." What did it mean? At the time, no one had answers. But for a small town already steeped in snow and superstition, it became the first real clue. And though the trail would grow cold for years, it was far from dead. As winter gave way to spring in 1991, the mystery surrounding the 3 missing nuns gripped Ashford like a vice. The investigation ran for weeks, then months. Eventually, the headlines faded, the search slowed. And like so many small-town tragedies, life pressed forward, though never quite the same. At St. Agnes Abbey, the sisters prayed daily for Margaret, Annette, and Rachel. Their names were added to the intentions at every Mass. Their rooms were left untouched for years, as if awaiting their return. But inside those walls, there was a quiet, unspoken tension. No one dared say it aloud, but some of the sisters suspected the truth was being kept from them. Outside the abbey, the town of Ashford returned to routine, at least on the surface. Locals still gossiped in hushed tones at Daisy's diner. Children dared each other to sneak up to the abbey's gates after dark. And the story of the vanished Sisters of St. Agnes slowly transformed into local folklore, shared in whispers by candlelight and around campfires. Theories flourished. Had the nuns run away? Been kidnapped? Killed? Some even murmured about government cover-ups or cult activity, but nothing was ever proven. Then, more than 30 years later, in March 2023, everything changed. The abbey, now reduced to a few aging nuns and converted into a historical landmark, received a grant to renovate the old East Wing. The idea was to restore the space into a small heritage museum, preserving the history of Benedictine life in New England. Contractors were brought in. Scaffolding went up. Dust filled the air. And on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, a worker named Mike Langford made a discovery that would reignite the mystery. Mike, a quiet 42-year-old with a background in historic building restoration, had just finished pulling out a section of warped wood paneling along the north wall of the old library when he noticed something odd, a hollow sound behind the wall. Curious, he tapped again. Definitely not solid. He pried back the rotted wood carefully and uncovered a shallow recess in the masonry. Sealed with plaster. Hidden for decades. Inside the cavity, wrapped in waxed cloth, was a small rectangular bundle. "I thought it might be a stash of old letters," Mike would later say. "Didn't expect what I found." It was a diary, bound in brown leather, the cover cracked with age. On the first page, written in precise, almost calligraphic handwriting, "Property of Rachel Monroe, servant of God and keeper of the truth, 1990-1991. Mike sat frozen for a moment, dust swirling around him. Like every Ashford local, he knew the story of the 3 missing nuns. He'd heard it since childhood. But this was something real, tangible. He didn't go to the abbess. He didn't even report it to his foreman. Instead, one name came to mind: Frank Dalton. Frank, now 55, was a former state trooper who had led the original search for the sisters. After retiring early due to a heart condition in 2018, he'd stayed in Ashford and, according to many, had never truly let go of the case. He was known to keep clippings, notes, even hand-drawn maps of the abbey and surrounding areas in his garage. Mike drove straight to Frank's modest home at the edge of town. Within the hour, the 2 men were seated in Frank's kitchen, the journal between them like a ticking bomb. "We should take it to the police," Mike said. "We will," Frank replied, his hand resting gently on the leather cover. "But after 32 years, we deserve to know what's in here." And the first pages were ordinary: gardening notes, spiritual reflections, weather observations. Rachel's handwriting was neat and steady, her tone serene. But as they flipped deeper into the journal, the tone began to shift. November 1990. Sister Annette told me something today that shook me. I won't write the details here, not yet. But if it's true, God help us. December 1990. Sister Margaret has confirmed it. The records Annette found in the parish archives aren't just old financial ledgers. They show transfers, payments, from groups I've never heard of. Why would they be linked to the abbey? The entries became increasingly cryptic, full of veiled references. The basement, the other records, the man in the black coat. And then, finally, one that stopped Frank cold. January 20th, 1990. Father Bell is not who he says he is. He knows we're getting close. He's watching us. Sister Margaret says we need to act before it's too late. If anyone finds this journal, know that we didn't disappear. We were silenced. Frank read the line over and over. Father Thomas Bell had served as the town's priest until 1995, when he was suddenly reassigned to a parish in Chicago. No explanation. No announcement. He died in 2010 from a stroke. Frank had always found him distant, cold. But this was different. One final entry, dated January 21st, stood out. Tomorrow we leave. The man Annette contacted has evidence. He'll meet us at the Greyhound station in Montpelier. If something happens, search the chapel basement, beneath the old wine rack. That's where the truth begins. Frank stood up so fast his chair clattered to the floor. "I know that place," he said. "That wine rack's been there since before I was born." Mike grabbed his jacket. "So we go check it out?" Frank hesitated, then nodded. That evening, under cover of darkness, they returned to the abbey. Mike still had his work credentials. Frank brought a flashlight, a notepad, and a determination he hadn't felt in years. The basement of St. Agnes Abbey was cold and cavernous. Stone floors, moldy wooden beams, shelves of dusty wine bottles dating back to the 1800s. And behind the largest rack, exactly where Rachel had written, they found it. A door. Metal. Rusted. Completely out of place. It wasn't locked, but it was heavy. Frank's hands trembled slightly as he pushed it open. Behind it, a narrow room. Bare walls. Cement floor. Shelves with old boxes, a desk, and in the far corner, a stain. Dark. Circular. Barely visible. Frank's flashlight flicked off the light switch. "Don't say it," Mike whispered. But they both knew. Blood. Frank reached for his phone. Time to call the authorities. The following morning, the Vermont State Police arrived at St. Agnes Abbey. At the head of the team was Lieutenant Sarah Mercer, a sharp, no-nonsense officer with 2 decades of investigative experience and a reputation for solving cold cases no one else would touch. She had read about the 1991 disappearances during her time at the academy. Now, standing in the cold stone basement of the abbey, staring at a hidden chamber no one had entered in 3 decades, she felt like she was walking straight into a ghost story. Inside the hidden room, forensics officers quickly confirmed what Frank and Mike had feared. Traces of human blood, aged but preserved by the cool, dry conditions. More unsettling still, the room wasn't empty. Along the back wall, stacked neatly, were metal shelves filled with cardboard boxes, not dusty, not deteriorated, but clearly maintained. Someone had been entering this space long after 1991. The boxes contained a trove of documents, financial records, correspondence, and most alarmingly, photographs. Dozens of photos of children. Boys and girls, mostly between the ages of 8 and 12. Each photo had a small number written on the back in black marker. One child had ON91V scrawled on the reverse. Another read 044NE. Most were black and white. None included names. Lieutenant Mercer's stomach churned. These weren't just misplaced orphanage records. This was something else entirely. And then Frank, digging through one box labeled Classified, BAR Project, found something that made his blood run cold. A memo. Dated 1987, on official Diocese of Burlington letterhead. The subject, St. Agnes Transfer Program. It was signed by Bishop Gerald Henley, now deceased. The letter authorized the transfer of international youth wards through independent adoption partnerships operating out of the abbey. Attached was a list of names and routing numbers for financial donations, some of which led to accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Why would an abbey in Vermont be involved in international adoptions? Mercer asked out loud. Frank nodded grimly. Because it wasn't just about adoptions. It was about money. And God knows what else. They found a file labeled simply Monroe R. Inside, pages from Rachel's personal diary, copies, not originals, alongside medical forms, intake logs, and an incident report from 1989, signed by Sister Annette Green, back when she was still listed as Dr. A. Green, M.D. One note stood out. Sedation levels too high. Child was unresponsive for nearly 48 hours. I cannot continue to be complicit. At the bottom of the file was a letter, handwritten in tight cursive on convent stationery. We know too much. If anything happens to us, find the Greyhound station logs for January 22nd. Look for a man named Charles Benning, M.A.R.M.A. That same day, Lieutenant Mercer's team filed a request with the diocese to access any related archives. They received a terse response. We have no records under that designation. So Mercer went around them. With a judge's approval, she secured a search warrant for the diocese's private archive room in Burlington. There, in a back hallway behind the cathedral offices, a frail elderly priest named Father Edmund Carey led her to a locked safe. This archive hasn't been opened in years, he whispered. It was Bishop Henley's private collection. The combination had been written inside a missal. When the safe opened, Mercer found only 6 folders inside. One of them read simply, Case 4473B, St. Agnes. Inside were the original intake records of 41 children, all listed under temporary guardianship of St. Agnes Abbey between 1981 and 1990. No next of kin, no international paperwork, just shipment logs, transfer dates, routing slips, and photos. The same children from the basement. It was real. All of it. Back in Ashford, word began to spread. The local paper ran a story about new evidence in the 1991 disappearance of 3 nuns. Frank Dalton refused interviews. Mike Langford shut off his phone. But one person who saw the news couldn't stay silent. Lillian Monroe, Rachel's younger sister. She'd left Ashford in 1995, never believing the story that her sister had walked away from her vows. Rachel had written every week until she didn't. For 32 years, Lillian waited. Now, seeing her sister's name on the news, she packed her things and flew home from Portland, Oregon. Meanwhile, Mercer continued digging. She located the Montpelier Greyhound Station records for January 20, 1991. No one named Charles Benning had bought a ticket, but someone named C. Jennings had reserved 3 seats to New York City under cash payment. The ticket clerk at the time, now retired, remembered one detail. There was a priest, the man said. Came by a few days later, asked for the security tapes, said it was a matter of church business. The tapes were never returned. Back at the Abbey, Lieutenant Mercer received a call from forensics. "Lieutenant, we found something else in the basement." A hidden floorboard, loose beneath one of the storage cabinets. Inside, an old cassette tape in a Ziploc bag, written on the label, January 21st, Confessional. When they played it, the room went silent. A man's voice, calm, authoritative. "You can't prove anything, sister." Then another voice, sharp, female, furious. "We have the documents, and if you think we won't go public, you don't know us." Then a second female voice, softer, trembling. "You're a man of God. How could you—" Then a loud bang, like a door slamming shut. And silence. Rachel, Annette, Margaret, speaking from the past. The truth was clawing its way into the light. Lieutenant Mercer had the cassette tape sent to a digital forensics lab. While the original audio was degraded, probably due to decades of moisture and dust, the engineers managed to clean up the voices. And what they confirmed was chilling. The man speaking on the tape was none other than Father Thomas Bell, the former priest of Ashford. His voice matched recordings from parish ceremonies in the late 80s. But what made Mercer's skin crawl wasn't the confirmation of his identity. It was the tone. Calm. Calculating. As if he knew exactly how much power he held. In the tape, Sister Rachel's voice cracked when she pleaded, "The children deserve better. They were promised families. Not—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the silence that followed said enough. Mercer took the audio straight to the state attorney's office. They issued a request for a grand jury review, not just into the disappearances, but into the documents found at the Abbey and the diocese archive. Meanwhile, back in Ashford, Lillian Monroe, Rachel's sister, met with Frank Dalton at the local coffee shop. She wore a green parka, the same one Rachel had bought her during a snowstorm in '89. It still fit. Somehow. "I knew she didn't run," Lillian said, clutching a photo of her sister in habit and veil, her eyes lit up like a sunrise. "Rachel was brave, too brave for her own good." Frank nodded. "She left a trail, Lillian, and we're finally following it." But the trail wasn't done, revealing its horrors. Just days later, an anonymous call came in to the Ashford Police Department. A woman's voice, electronically distorted, gave precise GPS coordinates for a wooded area 20 miles outside of town. Her only words? "Under the pine with the twisted trunk. 32 years is long enough." And the team, Frank, Mercer, a forensic anthropologist, and 2 officers, hiked to the spot early the next morning. Snow clung to the trees like white ash. The sun had barely broken over the hills. The twisted trunk wasn't hard to find. A pine tree, half dead, bent at a sharp, unnatural angle. They began to dig. 2 hours in, Mercer's shovel struck something solid. It wasn't a coffin. It wasn't even a proper grave. It was a metal locker, rusted but sealed tight with steel latches. When they cracked it open, what they found stunned them into silence. Inside, a zippered canvas bag filled with cassette tapes, labeled by date, most between December 1990 and January 1991. A weathered photo album, its pages filled with pictures of children, none labeled, and wrapped in oilcloth, a thick envelope labeled, "Open only in case of our death or disappearance. Sisters, Margaret Doyle, Annette Green, Rachel Monroe." Mercer didn't open it in the woods. She had it transported to the Vermont State Police headquarters. There, under full evidence protocols, she unsealed the envelope. Inside was a handwritten confession, signed by all three women. 12 pages, meticulously written. It detailed their discovery of what they called the adoption laundering network, a pipeline that moved vulnerable children from South America and Southeast Asia into the United States under the guise of Catholic-sponsored adoption, facilitated by rogue clergy and private donors. The confession named names: Father Thomas Bell, Bishop Gerald Henley, 3 donors, 2 pharmaceutical executives, and a retired senator from New Hampshire, and most shockingly, a federal liaison listed as Agent M. Calloway, Department of Health and Human Services, 1987 to 1990. Frank read it all in one sitting. At the end of the document, Sister Margaret had written in her familiar, looping script, "We leave this not out of fear, but out of duty. Should this letter be found, let it be our testimony, our final vow, made not to the church, but to truth." By the following morning, national media had descended on Ashford. CNN, NBC, even foreign outlets. The story of the Vanishing Sisters of Vermont had suddenly become headline news across the country. A special task force was assembled under federal jurisdiction. And Mercer? She was asked to remain involved as a lead consultant. But there was still one question left unanswered. Where were the sisters? The locker had contained no human remains, only records, photographs, and evidence, pieces of the puzzle. But the women themselves? Gone. Until Frank received an email from a secure, anonymous server. It read, "If you truly seek closure, look for the crash that never made the papers. Mile marker 118 on Route 2. John 22, 1991. 3 souls went off the road that night, but only one body was found. Attached was a PDF of a state accident report, long sealed. The official record? A single vehicle accident reported at 10:46 p.m. A gray Renault station wagon. Registered to 1 Charles Benning. Declared dead at the scene, but no mention of passengers. The team returned to the site the next day. Deep in a wooded gully off Route 2, they found the remains of the Renault, almost completely covered in foliage and decades of soil. It had never been removed, never even searched beyond the surface. This time, they brought ground-penetrating radar. What they found changed everything. Buried in a shallow grave near the twisted wreck were the skeletal remains of 3 adult women, each wrapped in coarse cloth and plastic sheeting. Forensic dental records confirmed it within 48 hours. Margaret Doyle, Annette Green, Rachel Monroe. The sisters had never made it to Montpelier. They never made it past that winding mountain road. They had been executed and buried, along with their truth. But they had left behind a trail no one could silence. The identification of the sisters' remains, Margaret, Annette, and Rachel, hit Ashford like a storm. What had once been whispered about in coffee shops and passed off as legend was now a verified, decades-long crime involving child trafficking, high-ranking clergy, and government complacency. The discovery of their bodies, 3 brave women buried just yards away from a staged car crash, meant one thing: they had been silenced. And for 32 years, the system that buried them had nearly succeeded in erasing the truth. But not anymore. The tapes, the photos, the hidden archives, the confession, all of it was irrefutable. By mid-2023, Vermont's Attorney General's office had launched a full-scale investigation. But the story had already gone federal. The Department of Justice stepped in. A grand jury was convened. Arrests followed. The first to fall was Dr. Marcus Calloway, the former federal liaison named in the sisters' confession. Now 73 and living in a gated retirement community in Arizona, Calloway was taken into custody without incident. He denied any knowledge of the adoption laundering network, but financial records told a different story. Payments traced from offshore accounts linked directly to him. Then came Paul Kingsley, a Boston-based pharmaceutical executive whose foundation had donated over $1.4 million to the Diocese of Burlington during the 1980s. The donations were supposedly earmarked for mission work, but ended up funneled into shell corporations and ultimately private adoption agencies in New York, Miami, and even Geneva. But the most damning piece of evidence? A microcassette hidden in a silver medallion. It was found in a cedar box belonging to Lillian Monroe, who had been keeping her sister's belongings in a trunk for over 3 decades. She'd forgotten about the medallion until she returned home after the burial and opened the box to light a candle beside Rachel's photo. The medallion was hollow. Inside, a tightly rolled piece of paper and a microcassette, marked simply with a date, January 18th, 1991. The audio was short, but devastating. Rachel's voice. "If this is the end, no, we did not run. We stood for what was right. We saw children trafficked under the flag of mercy, and we said no more. If you're hearing this, make it mean something." With that, the Department of Justice had everything they needed. In late 2023, 15 individuals were indicted, including former clergy, private agency executives, and civil servants tied to child placement and immigration offices. A few had passed away over the years, but many were still alive, living quietly, comfortably, and in some cases, still actively working. Trials began in early 2024. The media dubbed it the St. Agnes case. Victims, now adults in their 30s and 40s, came forward from across the U.S., Colombia, the Philippines, and Guatemala. Some had long suspected their adoption stories didn't add up. Others had blocked out their past entirely, until their childhood photo flashed across a news report. Thanks to the sisters' documentation and Dr. Annette Green's meticulous records, over 120 trafficked children were identified. Many were reunited with surviving family. Some met siblings for the first time. Others returned to their birth countries, carrying the weight of lost years, but also answers. In Vermont, the town of Ashford changed forever. The state government issued a formal apology. The Diocese of Burlington, after years of denial, finally acknowledged serious failings and grievous betrayal. They offered reparations and committed to cooperating with every aspect of the federal investigation. The St. Agnes Abbey, now deconsecrated, was officially turned into the Margaret, Annette, and Rachel Center for Human Rights, dedicated to combating child trafficking and institutional abuse. The chapel, once dark and quiet, now serves as a memorial hall. At its center stands a simple glass case housing 3 items: Rachel's diary, open to her final entry, Sister Margaret's rosary, found at the burial site, and Annette's stethoscope, tarnished but intact. Each year, on January 22nd, the town holds a vigil in the snow. Hundreds gather with candles. Some pray, some cry. Others stand in silence. But everyone knows what it means. It means justice took 32 years. But it came. Frank Dalton, the retired trooper who never stopped looking, was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2024 for his role in exposing the case. At the ceremony, he simply said, "They left us clues. We followed, and now the truth lives where silence once did." Mike Langford, the construction worker who found the diary, refused interviews and turned down all book deals. But at the unveiling of the Memorial Center, he left a small note in the guest book. Just one sentence. "I didn't find them. They found me." And what about Lillian Monroe? She helped establish the Rachel Monroe Scholarship Fund, which sends underprivileged girls to college in memory of her sister's dreams and bravery. In the final chapter of Rachel's diary, now digitally preserved, her last written words are underlined twice. "We did not vanish. We were taken. But the truth cannot be buried forever. One day someone will dig." That day came. And now, because of 3 nuns from a quiet Vermont town, hundreds of others have a voice. Thank you for following the full story.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.